Okay, I can edit all this out.
Okay, I can't get it to plus stressors and occupational burnout. For my introduction, the purpose of my research study was to research how job-induced stress affects employees, and if there is a direct correlation between job stress that eventually leads to occupational burnout. And one of the things that I was looking for in my research was what the implications we can learn from this research. And that would be, and another question would be how we can begin to support employees in the workplace to combat occupational burnout. So for my first literature review, my first article was an article entitled Coping with Job Stress and Burnout in the Human Services by Cheng et al. They investigated the effects of coping with psychological strain and burnout produced by job stress. Their method, Cheng et al. Conducted a survey of 141 human service workers between the ages of 25 to 65 years old, and it assessed specific job stressors utilizing open-ended questions and measured strain using closed-ended alienation, satisfaction, and symptom scales. Cheng et al.'s findings were that job stress was associated with high levels of strain that eventually led to occupational burnout. The results suggested that social service agencies should take actions to reduce stress among their employees. For my second article in my literature review, I reviewed an article entitled A 3-Year Cohort Study of the Relationships Between Coping, Job Stress, and Burnout After a Counseling Intervention for Help-Seeking Physicians. Rowe et al. In 2010 proposed that knowledge about important stress factors in the workplace are needed to reduce occupational burnout. Rowe et al. And his colleagues did a 3-year-long longitudinal study that was aimed to investigate the roles of coping strategies, job stress, and personality traits in burnout reduction after the implementation of a counseling intervention was implemented for distressed physicians. Their method consisted of 227 physicians that received counseling intervention for burnout, and this occurred at the Resource Center in Via Sana in Norway between 2003 and 2005. Participants were followed with self-report assessments at baseline on year 1, and then again 3 years later to follow up. The main outcome measures of this research study were that emotional exhaustion, which was one dimension of burnout, job stress, and coping strategies, and neuroticism did have a relationship with occupational burnout. However, in their findings, 184 physicians, 81% being male, 101 being female, completed the longitudinal study and completed the 3-year follow-up assessment. They found that the implementation of counseling interventions reduced levels of emotional exhaustion, job stress, and emotion-focused coping strategies from baseline to 1 year after the intervention were actually maintained 3 years later in their follow-up assessment. The next article that I reviewed was researched by Pines and Keenan, and they researched occupational burnout within the framework of stress research. Their methods utilized a theoretical model that addressed the relationship between job strain, and occupational burnout as adverse responses to work stressors as antecedent variables, work importance as an intervening variable, and various stress outcomes such as job satisfaction and performance as consequences. Pines and Keenan surveyed 1,182 Israeli police officers within the mean age of 35.9 years of age. In their findings, Pine and Keenan found that strain and burnout have different correlations with job stressors, which was the assumed antecedent variables, with work's importance being an assumed intervening variable, and with physical and emotional symptoms, performance level, job satisfaction, and desire to quit the force, which were assumed stress outcomes. And they found that all the differences between these correlations were significant. They assessed this by z-tests based on Z-Fisher transformations. Pines and Keenan in 2005 found that there was a significant relationship between job stressors and their respective consequences in perceived job performance, occupational satisfaction, physical and emotional symptoms, and additionally, the desire to leave the profession entirely. So for my research question, my main question was, what job stressors lead to occupational burnout? My subsequent questions were, is there a relationship between specific job stressors that lead to occupational burnout? And what are the specific job stressors that lead to occupational burnout? I would like to now operationally define what I mean by job stressors. And I have operationally defined that as any emotional, psychological, and physical stress on an employee that causes significant disruption in job performance and or in personal, relational, and socio-emotional domains. And the operational definition of burnout would be work-induced stressors that ultimately result in an employee resigning from their current occupation and or choosing to leave the profession they are working in entirely. So for my intended population sample and methods, my population sample and demographics and methods were, my population was UMass Global graduate students were surveyed taking Psychology 528 Research Methods course by Dr. Cheng. I had 15 individuals respond to my survey. Student demographics included a survey of students between the ages of 18 to 65 plus years of age. I assessed for males, females, and LGBTQIA plus orientations. I also assessed specific occupations, surveyed that, and processed that data. I utilized Likert 5-point scales to identify specific job-related stressors, Likert 5-point scales to assess the relationship between specific job stressors and potential occupational burnout. Likert 5-point rating scales were utilized to assess the levels of job-related stressors, and Likert 5-point rating scales were utilized to assess levels of occupational burnout. For my results, my first question was, what is your profession? And for that, the administrator of the survey, which was me, assessed the following professions and occupations. So educator or education employees, business employees, employees of the medical profession, full-time parents, students, hospitality workers, retail workers, food service workers, people working in human services, or others not listed. And here we can see that 13.3% were in the education field, 6.7% were in the business field, 0% reported being in the medical profession, 6.7% were full-time parents, 26.7% were students, 6.7% were in the hospitality industry, 0% worked in retail, 0% worked in food services, 13.3% worked in human services, and 26.7% were reported other or not listed. Question number 2, I asked, how many hours per week do you typically work? So the administrator of this survey assessed how many hours per week the participants worked. So we see here that 13.3% worked 0 to 10 hours per week, 6.7% worked 11 to 20 hours per week, 13.3% worked 21 to 30 hours per week, 40% worked 31 to 40 hours per week, 13.3% worked 41 to 50 hours per week, 13.3% worked 51 to 60 hours per week, 0% reported working 61 to 70 hours a week, and 0% reported working 70 or more hours per week. Question number 3, I asked, are you currently experiencing occupational stress? The administrator of this survey assessed if participants were experiencing occupational stress. As you can see from the graph, 80% stated yes, 13.3% stated no, 0% stated maybe, and 6.7% stated unsure. Question number 4 was a rating scale that I used to rate one's occupational stress level. The administrator asked participants to rate their current stress level using a 5-point Likert scale, 1 being very low and 5 being very high. 0% reported very low stress levels, 13.3% reported low stress levels, 40% reported moderate stress levels, 26.7% reported high stress levels, and 20% reported very high stress levels. In question 5, I asked, are you currently experiencing occupational burnout? The administrator assessed participants experiencing occupational burnout, and as you can see from our pie chart, 60% reported no occupational burnout experiences, 20% reported yes to occupational burnout, experiencing occupational burnout, 1.67% reported maybe to occupational burnout, and 13.3% reported that they were unsure if they were experiencing occupational burnout. In question 6, I asked them, my participants, to rate their level of occupational burnout. The administrator utilized a 5-point Likert scale to assess the rate of occupational burnout. 33.3% reported very low levels of occupational burnout. 20% reported low levels of occupational burnout. 26.7% reported moderate levels of occupational burnout. 13.3% reported high levels of occupational burnout, and 6.7% reported very high levels of occupational burnout. Question 7, I asked, what areas of your life are affected by occupational stress and burnout? The administrator asked participants about specific areas of their life that were affected by occupational stress and burnout. And I assessed physical illness, occupational absenteeism, relational challenges, sleep disturbances, mental health challenges, depressive symptoms, anxiety symptoms, eating disorders, fatigue and chronic fatigue, and others not listed. As we can see, 26.7% reported experiencing physical illness, 13.3% reported occupational absenteeism, 60% reported relational challenges, 66.7% reported sleep disturbances, 53.3% reported mental health challenges, 33.3% reported depressive symptoms, 73.3% reported anxiety symptoms, 20% reported eating disorders, 40% reported fatigue or chronic fatigue symptoms, and 20% reported other or not listed symptomology. Question 8, I wanted to know which area was the most disruptive in people's lives. So the administrator asked participants to choose what areas of stress were causing them the most disruption in their lives. And I had a multiple drop-down menu for options for the participants to choose from. And as you can see from the pie chart here, 0% reported physical illness, 6.7% reported occupational absenteeism, 26.7% reported relational challenges, 6.7% reported sleep disturbances, 13.3% reported mental health challenges, 0% reported depressive symptoms, 40% reported anxiety symptoms, 6.7% reported eating disorders, 6.7% reported feeling fatigue and chronic fatigue symptoms, and 0% reported other or not listed as being the most disruptive symptomologies due to job stress. As we can see with this survey, that anxiety symptoms were quite high. So what I am seeing here is that anxiety is looking to be one of the highest, most disruptive symptomologies in job-related stress. My conclusions for my research was that the results of my survey found that within my participants, there was a relationship between job stressors and emotional and physiological symptomology that did cause disruption in particular areas of employees' lives. However, the results did not illustrate a correlation between job stressors and occupational burnout as I operationally defined them. And this was contrary to my initial hypothesis. The lessons that I learned was that not all job-related stressors will eventually lead to occupational burnout. Also, that the implementation of mental health interventions such as counseling services and teaching of coping skills or providing training on coping skills for employees may reduce occupational burnout. Challenges and limitations that I experienced in doing this research was that there was a limited participant population due to our class size. I do think that my operational definitions of my initial survey should have been better and more well-defined. I needed to provide more clarity for my participants. And I would have liked to have narrowed my scope of my research project to one particular profession, for example, the teaching profession, in lieu of surveying multiple professions, because I think that it needed to be more specific to actually see if particular job stressors for particular professions led to ultimate occupational burnout, which would be the quitting of one's job or leaving the profession in its entirety. The applications that I have found for this research project was that the implementation of mental health services, counseling services, should be offered at job sites. And that may reduce job stress, which would reduce occupational burnout. Also, providing mental health services and or counseling services to employees on the job may increase job satisfaction, higher productivity, and occupational longevity. And I think that there is a need for mental health services and or counseling services for employees to access as they experience stress and as challenges arise, so that we can see a decrease in job stressors, such as that high level of anxiety that I saw in my results, and also other emotional and physiological challenges. This concludes my presentation on job stressors and occupational burnout. My references are Pines and Keenan in their journal article, Stress and Burnout, The Significant Difference, in their journal, Personality and Individual Differences. Rowe, Tyson, Hofart, a 3-year cohort study in the relationship between coping, job stress, and burnout after a counseling intervention for help-seeking physicians, published by BMC Public Health. And lastly, Shin M, Rosario M, and Morch H, and Chestnut D, Coping with Job Stress and Burnout in Human Services, from the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and I look forward to hearing your feedback. Have a wonderful evening. Good night.